people to bring old-fashioned paper and pencil or pen. So it turns out, a lot of times now, when I used to do things in person, people would bring out their laptop and start to take notes. If you do that, if you type, you'll retain about 10% of the material. If you write it down physically, you're going to retain 40%. And if you review your own notes, it'll go up to 80%. So this is very important to understand. And so as we're going to watch the videos, this is really a clinical webinar. I want you to be jotting down all the signs that you see of what we're calling the unconscious alliance. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it. I have a very short PowerPoint because, again, I really want us to focus on the clinical material. But I, again, want you to start jotting down the signs that you see. And also, maybe you can even make 2 columns. If there's something that I'm doing, interventions that I'm making that are speaking to the unconscious alliance, you might want to also earmark those, because it's something I'm very focused on really from the first moments of the interview. And, Yuval, as you were just talking about how you knew nothing about ISTDP, most therapists around the world have still never heard of it. And just last week, I was being interviewed, I guess, by the head of APA's video production, right? So they do an expert series, and you would imagine that this fellow would have a pretty good idea about what's going on in the field, right? Because he's selecting experts, right, from CBT, IFS, whatever. And as we were talking, and I was just talking, spontaneously, he's like, "Oh, really?" And like he starts writing things down. Okay, it was stuff like either he hadn't heard or, and it just reinforced to me how unique and important this method is, how much we have to offer to the field, and that we all need to be sharing what we're learning to increase the effectiveness of psychotherapy, which, over 50 years as a field, our effectiveness has not increased. And that's pretty bad, right? So again, I'm glad that you're all here. I hope you will get actively involved and that you'll get passionate and share that with your colleagues as well as your patients, of course. So we're going to start with a very short PowerPoint. And again, I hope people watched the videos that I already put out about that slideshow. Play from the start. Here we go. This is the only thing I get nervous about these days is the darn technical. Literally, I'm like, up at night worried about it. Okay, so today we're really going to be talking about how to identify, first of all, right, and then strengthen the unconscious aspect of the therapeutic alliance. So I want to start with just talking about Davinlou's stand to begin with, because his discovery of the UTA, and as far as I know, he's the only clinician who talks about an unconscious aspect to the therapeutic alliance. I mean, everyone in therapy talks about the alliance, but they're talking about the conscious aspect. And so his discovery is a part of the whole. And Davinlou was really radical in many ways. And one of the ways that he was radical way back when, in the 60s and 70s, was when he abandoned the medical model with a focus on pathology, and he shifted to a potential model. So he really took the stand that everybody has the potential to heal and to become whole. And so he was very ambitious in this. He didn't want to just help people manage symptoms or go from being severely depressed to moderately depressed. I mean, he really wanted to help people heal and really recapture their freedom. So he was highly ambitious, And he challenged himself and his patients to work hard to achieve the best possible results. And so as he started to become much more active, and especially active in pointing out and then challenging defenses and resistances that were going to get in the way, he discovered this force of an unconscious aspect of the alliance that the patient would, without even their conscious awareness, start to collaborate with the therapist. And in a certain way, Davenlu even considers the resistance almost a part of the UTA. He's like, resistance is a good thing, right? If somebody suddenly starts resisting, right, as you're poking around in a particular area, right, that's letting you know, right, you're hitting a sore spot, and that's exactly where you want to focus. So as he started to experiment with this and strengthen the conscious and unconscious alliance in order to overcome, right, the forces of defense and resistance. So I often see trainees focusing exclusively on defense and resistance. They are just hammering away, right, at the obstacles and thinking that, you know, that's going to help the person give them up. But it really is the healthy part of the patient. It's you in alliance with their conscious and unconscious alliance that's going to help to overcome that resistance. So let's see. And again, you know, remember, ISTDP is based on psychoanalytic theory and the theory of unconscious conflicts, right? That there's that part of the patient who wants to open up in order to get better, but that evokes a lot of anxiety and, in many cases, guilt. And there are also forces of resistance that have to be dealt with. And so Davenlu always dealt with both sides of this conflict and intensified it in order to create a crisis which triggers the opening of the unconscious. So what is this thing we're calling the UTA? Davenlu wrote very little about it, actually, and it's a poorly articulated concept that refers to an innate healing force within the patient that's going to cooperate with the therapist in the process of healing. So I tend to equate it to our physical immune system, right? That we have kind of an emotional immune system. So if you get sick or you cut yourself, as long as your immune system is healthy, you're going to heal. Right? But if you have impairments, if your immune system is weak, right, then you're not going to heal. And a similar thing happens emotionally. And if you think about it, patients who really rely excessively on defenses, they are simultaneously suppressing, right, these other forces, this healing force, right? It prevents healing from happening. So again, when we talk about the unconscious aspect, we're talking about the patient giving us hints and clues to the source of their suffering without them even being aware of it. So it's things like a slip of the tongue, and you're going to see some really great examples of that, where the person's like, oh, I didn't mean to say that. Right? It just slips out. They'll suddenly remember a dream or have an association that sheds light on the origin of the conflict. The UTA very often communicates non-verbally, right? So you really have to watch. And as Alan Abbas says, you want to listen with your eyes, right? Suddenly a patient who's, they come in, they have their coat on, their arms are crossed, their eyes are to the floor. And then as you're speaking to them, suddenly, they look at you and they take off their coat, right? And decide to stay a while, right? Or they'll sit forward. when we're beginning to ask for feelings, people will literally, their conscious mind will say, no, I'm not a violent person. I really, I wouldn't want to do anything. And I'll say, well, I think your fist knows something you don't, right? So the unconscious will already be mobilized. So it's very important for you to keep your eye out for that, and to really, in a sense, prioritize speaking to the unconscious and listening to it over the conscious mind, right? So this is the part of the patient that's revealing rather than concealing important information. So in the beginning, Davenlu talked about these twin forces of alliance and resistance, both of which have a conscious and unconscious element. And then over time, he talked about triple factors. So he talks about the complex transference feelings, resistance, especially transference resistance, and UTA as triple forces in operation. So now I'm going to tell you what my understanding is, okay? So it seems to me that the unconscious therapeutic alliance is a manifestation of innate forces or drives within us that operate from birth until death. And the twin forces, which Sidney Blatt talked about, if you haven't read his fabulous book on the polarities of experience, we are all, again, from day one, we have infant studies, that we are motivated to exercise our autonomy, that we need to be self-directed and self-defined. So throughout our life, we're asking, who am I? Why am I here? What do I want to do? What impact do I want to have as a separate person? And at the same time, we have another aspect, attachment, the need to be close, right? So we need to be attached and we need to be separate. So that need to attach securely to others and to be self-defined and self-directed are alive from birth until death. And no matter how buried they are, in the first case you're going to see, the woman is consciously extremely resistant. She doesn't want to be there. She doesn't know why she's there. She doesn't know who I am. Are you normal anyway? She says, what the heck am I doing here? Right. So consciously, and yet she's there. Okay. Nobody has a gun to her head. Right. So in her case, the unconscious alliance is almost all there is at the beginning. She doesn't have much of a conscious alliance. So again, how do we spot that and how do we strengthen it so that we have some chance to help this person? And again, that's, when I'm talking about these two factors of alliance and resistance, I call it the 1-2 punch, right? So I'm always almost alternating my interventions, right, to highlight, so you're here, so there's a part of you that really wants the help, and yet at the same time, you're hopeless and passive and resigned. So I don't just side with one, right, but I'm always speaking about two. And again, it's this UTA that is the healing force in therapy. And in my experience, I have never cured anybody. I don't think that we are the healing force, right? That healing force exists within, and we can facilitate it and strengthen with it and align with it so the person has an internal experience of healing by facing and experiencing their feelings and working through the conflicts that are responsible for their symptoms and suffering. Okay? So that's it for the didactic part. So questions, comments. Let me stop sharing that. Okay. So is everything okay? I see you.
Yeah, it's great.
So even though it says speaker view, I'm seeing you, not me. I don't know if that's happening to other people as well.
It depends on your you can click gallery view.
Oh, Oh, but I don't want, yeah, that's a
Okay.
little much. Okay. Any questions or comments at this point? You can just do that. Do you know that icon to raise your hand? It's an icon at the bottom there. There's that Zoom thing again.